All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Lipovetsky, and I'm professor of Slavic at Columbia University. And I'm very happy to open this session of the Russian Film Club at Columbia that we are running with Daria Ezerova together for the second semester, at least, if not the second,
Second
second
year.
year now, for second year now, thanks to the Harriman Institute. And so, due to the pandemic requirements and limitations, we are not screening actual films, but we are discussing them with our most exciting guests. And today, today we are having a wonderful panel, which we will introduce just in a second. But before we do this, I just want to say hello to everyone who joined us here at Zoom and at YouTube, and I'm very happy to see familiar names in the audience, and some experts in Gogol are making me nervous here, but I hope that we will survive. Right? That's And Gogol is mentioned, of course, for a reason, because today we are going to discuss Gogol and his most recent screen version. And for this, not only for this, of course, I want to introduce Daria Ezerova, who is the postdoctoral fellow at the Harriman Institute, a graduate of Yale University, and a real expert in cinema. Daria, Dasha.
Mark, thank you very much for a generous introduction. So I am going to abuse my moderator's privilege just a little bit in this introduction. And instead of telling our esteemed audience about the series itself, preface this with a little anecdote from last week. I was moved, I don't want to say inspired just yet, but I was moved by the news that Baz Luhrmann is slated to do an adaptation of Master and Margarita, or so the Hollywood rumor has it. And I posted a status update on my Facebook account asking my connections on social media to come up with the most ridiculous, the most absurd combination of filmmaker and a literary classic that would just create the absolute worst film adaptation ever. And the Slavic community, bless everyone's heart, responded right away with the most amazing combinations from Quentin Tarantino's Anna Karenina to David Lynch doing an adaptation of Moskva Petushki, which honestly is something that I would most certainly watch. And so, judging from the dynamic of that post, it quickly became apparent that what we might think is a really bad idea for an adaptation might actually be quite an unusual approach to an kind of all too familiar text, and immediately made me think about what is it that makes a successful screen adaptation, especially when the material that is being adapted for a screen is just known to just about everyone. So this is my way to introduce today's topic of discussion, which is Grigorii Konstantinopol'skii 4-episode adaptation of Dead Souls. And just a few facts to warm us up for this conversation. This is probably the best example of pandemic TV that Russia has produced. And by best, I mean, I have no idea how they made it, because it was shot between the two big waves of coronavirus pandemic in Russia. So it was shot in late spring and summer in record-breaking time, which also makes me think that filming never really stopped in Russia during the pandemic. The second thing that I wanted to bring up is that the producers of the film are the very same ones that 4 years ago did a kind of ludicrous adaptation of V in the film entitled I think it was called Gogol V with Alexander Petrov, that is famously known to be just absolute disaster. Yet somehow their involvement worked out quite well, in my view, in this particular adaptation. And the final thing that I wanted to bring up is actually a quote from one of the reviews that I saw online that said that this isn't really an adaptation of Gogol. This is, and I quote, Konstantinopol'skii collaborating with Gogol to create something completely new. And in my view, that's possibly a pretty productive way to look at it, however insane it might sound. So this is my introduction for today, and I'm going to move on to introducing our esteemed panelists today. Our first speaker is Anne Lounsbury, who is a professor of Russian literature and chair of the Department of Russian and Slavic Studies at New York University. She has published widely on 19th century Russian prose, as well as on African American and European literature. Her first book, Thin Culture, High Art, Gogol, Hawthorne, and Authorship in 19th Century Russia and America, was published by Harvard University Press in 2007. Her second book, Life is Elsewhere, Symbolic Geography in the Russian Novel, came out with Cornell University Press in 2019. In this book, Anne shows how 19th century Russian literature created an imaginary place called the Provinces, a place at once homogeneous, static, anonymous, and symbolically opposed to Petersburg and Moscow. Her articles have appeared in Slavic Review, Vopros Literatury, Russian Review, and others, and is also on the faculty advisory board of NYU's Jordan Center for the Advanced Study of Russia, where she's organized a number of conferences, symposia, and invited talks. Anne has a strong commitment to interdisciplinarity, having collaborated extensively with historians, and to increasing minority involvement in the Slavic field, both in scholarship and in the classroom. Mark?
I'm glad to introduce Lioudmila Fedorova, professor of Slavic languages, Department of Slavic Languages at Georgetown University. Mila wrote her first dissertation on Russian postmodernist poetry, but then her next book was Yankees in Petrograd, Bolsheviks in New York, that examined the myth of America as the other world in Russian literature and film. And most recently, she has finished a book on post-Soviet film adaptations of Russian literary classics, adaptation as symptom, Russian classics on the post-Soviet screen, which of course makes her a very relevant participant of this panel. And our third, very important participant is Ilya Gerasimov, founding and executive editor of the best historical journal in all languages that I'm aware of, Imperio, and the author of the monograph Plebeian Modernity, as well as a large number of articles on Russian history and colonial, post-colonial, post-imperial studies. We had a very informative exchange after Ilya watched this series for the first time, and I became very much willing to hear Ilya's opinion and sort of give Ilya the floor at this forum, because his take on Russian classics and on this film in particular is very interesting, I think. You will be the judges. All right.
Okay. I think, as always, if you've been following the events of the film club, in the beginning of each discussion, we're usually give the participants time to express their opinions on the film before Mark and I grill the participants with our very specific questions. So why don't we start there? So dear participants, in whatever order you found best, please take your time to express your likes and dislikes and your views on Konstantinopol'skii, Dead Souls.
Who would like to begin? Mila, please.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction, Mark. I believe that Konstantinopol'skii's adaptation of Dead Souls is an example of a very successful interpretation, and I agree with the definition of collaboration with Gogol. And it has many subtle details Gogol would definitely have appreciated. And it was great fun to watch, with wonderful work of the actors and its pretty biting satire. I do have some mild reservations about the ending, but we will probably discuss it later. And my favorite adaptation is still Lungin's and Arabov's The Case of Dead Souls from 2005. And the comparison of both films makes us think about the limits and the nature of humor when it concerns social critique. Because Konstantinopol'skii's film is revealing and funny, but Lungin's is absurd, funny, but is also frightening. And this adaptation lacks this quality. And in post-Soviet times, Gogol is one of the major Russian classics adapted to the screen. And it's interesting that he provides material for blockbuster genres, for horror movies like V or The Witch, a road movie or Western like Taras Bulba by Bartko. But if we look at all Gogol's adaptations together, it becomes clear that they usually investigate Russia's spatial structure and the relationship between the center, the periphery, and the world outside. And here it's we both have the East represented in the characters of Manilov, and the West, as we find out in the end. But I was quite surprised by the name of the peripheral town in the center of the adaptation, because it's Bugorsk. And it immediately brings to mind Zabugorsk and Zabugoria. So what is the relationship between this Bugorsk and the Russian world abroad? Later we'll find out that it's Russia who is the power controlling the Western politics. And in general, we see that the informational distance between the center and the periphery, thanks to the internet, is much shorter in our times than in Gogol's novel. And we remember that in Gogol's Dead Souls, the question of the wheel and the distance from the town in the center of the novel and the capital and the world abroad is brought up in the very beginning by the conversation of the peasants who are looking at the wheel and discussing whether it's possible for it to reach the capital and Kazan. But mostly the satire here is focused on this peripheral world. And we see Moscow only in a few glimpses. Also, although many scenes of the film, although they take place in the periphery, definitely deal with the problems of the center. For example, this hilarious scene of the trial of Chichikov. It's definitely about Russia as a whole. And from the very beginning, the series demonstrates the staples of Russian identity: the churches, the Great Patriotic War Memorial, and the local authorities. I was surprised that almost never we see the life of the common folks. Only a glimpse in Kapitan Kopeikin's ordeal in Moscow, who is a disabled veteran. I thought that the authors compensated the absence of the love line in the plot pretty successfully, which is an obvious deficiency of the previous adaptations. And here, while Selifan is enjoying himself sleeping around, Chichikov is shown as an object of manipulative erotic longing of many characters who want to use him for their own benefit. And it's Manilov's couple and Korobotchka, and the mayor's daughter, and finally Agafia Tikhonovna. I think it's necessary to mention, to praise the language of the film, amalgamating Gogol's text and the contemporary speech, because the authors combined both in a very funny way. Sometimes very subtle, playing with Gogol's tropes. For example, Chichikov, when he praises the town officials, says that they are not human beings, but the pride of the motherland. Не люди, а гордость Отечества. Or the conversation of the two policemen who are looking at Chichikov's car and saying, these are Moscow plates, is also very Gogolian, reminding of the Nevsky Prospect, a typically Gogolian use of synecdoche. But there are many original jokes in the center of the plot. For example, the joke, with whom would you like to lie after your death? But she's still alive. Yes, this is exactly the point. And this joke is, the authors play with this joke at some point. Or the mayor at one point announces, I have arrived unnoticed, подкрался незаметно. So in general, I believe that it is a very successful and funny adaptation. And in a way, it's a meta-adaptation because it's a film about contemporary revisiting of the past and manipulating the memory and constructing the new narrative about the national glory retroactively. Thank you.
Thank you, Milan.
Thank you, Milan. Thank you. Colleagues,
Ilya,
who would like to continue? Ilya?
Well, I can, and probably will start.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure,
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah. I just, first of all, I want to thank for inviting me to participate in this exchange organized by Harriman Institute as a very unlikely participant in this conversation, and hence I want to start with clarifying my positionality in this on this panel, this discussion. I'm a historian, which means not only that perhaps I ask some different questions and I practice some different approaches than others, but first of all, that my field lies elsewhere. So I don't have to think about artifacts of modern culture unless I'm really interested in something. So I can afford ignoring the stuff that I find to be of low quality, uninspiring, and this is the main difference as I see it. So when I learned last year, in the fall, when I learned about this new adaptation of Dead Souls, I wasn't just disinterested, but had a very strong triple prejudice against this project. First off, I'm of very low opinion of Russian TV series in general. And this is not my genre in principle. I don't have time for any series. Second, I feel very strongly, let's put it this way, about the prevailing trend to parasite on past cultural achievements, the global trend of remakes, which is greatly exacerbated in Russia, in Russian culture by this glaring void of any new authentic language of self-description. So the past 25 years, they have replicated all Soviet blockbusters and even films of the second tier, now third tier, I mean, with horrendous results, the 12 chairs, the irony of fate and whatnot. So why would Dead Souls be any different? This is what I was thinking. And third, what I knew about the premise and the plot irritated me even more. What a stupid idea, selling fake burial spots are for real, and it's a business plan. And what a vulgar idea to speculate on the political situation in the country, suggesting, for example, that one of such fancy spots would be next to Alexei Navalny's grave. I mean, after his poison in the Fjord, that was just didn't land well, in my opinion. So in short, the film was the ultimate abomination, in my view, before watching it. But then in mid-December, Mark wrote to me, "Have you watched the new Dead Souls? I think it's funny." And I was very surprised. But I trust Mark Lipovetsky. And after 2 days of hesitations and inner struggle, I decided to sneak a peek at the series, just to get a general idea of artistic language, the general atmosphere, acting quality. Now, картинка. No more than 5 minutes, so I took the laptop to bed, already going to sleep. What happened next was that we watched the first episode and immediately started watching the second, because the film was exceptionally good. It was real late. I mean, it was must be 2 in the morning. So we decided to watch the remaining 2 episodes next night on big screen. And we began watching, and it was getting worse and worse with every new scene. By the end, I physically suffered. I couldn't make myself look at the screen. I covered my eyes. I mean, it was painful. So I have prepared 2 brief interventions for today, if you can accommodate them later on. First, I will argue that this is the ideal adaptation of Gogol's Dead Souls that successfully translates into modern aesthetic and political language the very essence of Gogol's novel, and that Grigorii Konstantinopol'skii has masterfully handled this task. And second, a shorter one, I will offer a special model of trickster as a narrative strategy, not Mark's general theory of trickster, but a special theory of trickster, just applicable to this case, that explains the predicament of Gogol's original design, as illustrated by its translation in another artistic language and medium by Konstantinopol'skii. And this also will answer the questions of political subtext of the series, the war in Donbass, FSB, and so on. Thank you.
So we'll touch upon all these subjects. Thank you, Ilya. Thank you so much. And so you can see we have the specialist in adaptation. We have a historian with a very sharp eye on contemporary art, and we have, of course, a specialist in 19th century literature. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, Dasha. Thank you, the Harriman Institute. This is very interesting. And I am much, much further removed from this material, this cinema material, than either of you are. And I certainly did not go into it with any expectations, as both of you clearly did. I would say that the most confusing thing for me certainly was the bizarre sort of FSB intervention at the end. And I had to overcome both my extreme confusion about it and then my revulsion. So I decided to overcome my revulsion at the intervention by thinking of it as a kind of mirror image of Gogol's Book 2 of Dead Souls, had he not wisely burned it. Because, you know, Gogol himself really was an enthusiast for hierarchy and purification. And I'm not sure he would have disliked, actually, the idea of the sort of saintly FSB man, you know, swooping in and cleaning everything up. So I kind of tried to make the ending palatable to myself by thinking of it like that. But before I came to that, I tried to think about the rest of the series by kind of cordoning off that ending, which was in fact quite distasteful to me, and thinking about the rest of the episodes, basically 1, 2, and 3, which I thought were amazing as kind of co-creations with Gogol, especially the Manilov part, the part at Manilivka, and the idea of making Manilov and his wife these sort of Hindu files, I thought came off extremely well. I also wanted to speak to what Mila said about the center-periphery binary, which is so important, really the main structural principle of the poema, and it has to be collapsed now. You know, once you have the internet, it cannot be maintained in the same way. And I think that the series did that really well. You know, it's still, you still have these 2 points. You still have, you know, Moskva, Provincia, but they're in contact all the time. There's this sort of constant back and forth. And I thought that that was, quote, realistic and worked really well. As far as the sort of ideological where the film comes down ideologically, I will defer to you. I was very confused about what Konstantinopol'skii meant to say, you know, by Kapitan Karpikin, by the Donbass, by the you know, World War II reenactors. I will be very interested to hear your take on that. As far as both Karpikin and Nozdryov are wonderful mouthpieces for inane, mindless jingoism, right? You really couldn't do any better for mindless patriotism than Nozdryov. So in that sense, it's hard not to see it as parodic to some extent, but I don't know anything about Konstantinopol'skii and what his politics are. So I will be, I'll be interested to hear what you say. The last thing I would say that just strikes me about the plot is that, you know, in the 1840s, Gogol's Chichikov had to have a plan beyond just money, right? He couldn't just go to get cash. He needed to turn the dead souls, the pieces of paper, into land somehow, right? He needed to turn himself into a landed nobleman. He needed to have a bigger scheme. We're way beyond that, right? Even if the FSB had not stepped in, it's all just cash nexus, right? It's just about, it's fascinating in this film to see a room full of piles of money getting counted by machines. That was also really interesting to me. So thank you very much. That's the take of a faraway 19th century person on this TV series, and thank you for giving me the chance to watch it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We're looking forward to the developing of the points you touch in this brief statement. My only request, I have a suspicion that not all of the members of our audience have seen this adaptation. So please feel free to explicate what you're saying. Don't be afraid to steal the thunder. Anyway, people have an idea of what's going on.
From Konstantinopol'skii.
Yeah, but so yeah, we don't suffer about this, but just make it more obvious what people haven't seen, so they would be able to relate, right? So before we dive into the fabrics of this adaptation, which I hope our audience is intrigued enough, let me ask you a sort of a broader question. So this production caused moderately positive reviews. Some of them were angry, some of them were lukewarm, but there was an outcry of anger on the social media about the distortion of classics, right? So the eternal song about the classics that has been raped, distorted, and treated badly. So what is your take on generally speaking on the distortion of classics, or of contemporarization of classics that we see so sort of blatantly performed here? What do you think about it? Do you accept it calmly? Do you have some kind of internal resistance which you have to overcome? What is your take?
What are the limits to distortion?
What are the limits to distortion? Thank you so much.
That's Mila's question.
Okay.
I welcome all types of adaptations and interpretations. What I find really dangerous is adaptations. They try to present themselves as the true image of the text, because they, especially now, when people and young people, students, mostly watch the films rather than read the classics, are really in danger of taking such films as Svetozarev's Crime and Punishment, for example, for the real value, to think that this is what Crime and Punishment looks like. And especially in the 2000s, when the directors started to pretend that they are invisible, transparent, and retroactively tying their adaptations to the political demands of the new Russia, almost seamlessly distorting the text. This is dangerous, but with adaptations like Konstantinopol'skii, you will never make such a mistake. In general, I think that there is criteria for good adaptation. And it is when the new film and the classical text meet midway, when the film reveals something both about the present day and about the text in question. Because the text is not only the prism of looking at the contemporary world, but also something that is changed by the new adaptation. And I think it happens in Konstantinopol'skii's film. And I wonder if the director read Yuri Mann's works on dead souls, because Yuri Mann explained that, not explained because it's not the single interpretation, but he thinks that while the Dead Souls is a Russian version of the Divine Comedy, Chichikov visits the gentry not in the order of light scenes and less dead characters to the more dead, but the other way around. And looking at the structure of the film, he thinks that Chichikov and Plyushkin, who have a biography in the film, who have the potential for development, and also who have some signs of introspection in the film, are the characters that are not absolutely dead and that promise the resurrection. And there is evidence that they were intended to be resurrected in the later in the next volumes. And this is exactly what happens in Konstantinopol'skii's film, because his Chichikov is a positive character, as we find out.
I doubt that.
At least he's not cynical.
Jury's still out on that about Chichikov in this one. Hopefully we'll get to that one today.
Okay, I'm just trying to raise the level of polemics. I'm sorry.
I agree, but he's not cynical, and it's not his personal material gain what he cares about. But Plyushkin, I think, is the nicest character in the film. And by the way, when you have not gentry folks, but members of administration and officials, you see that Plyushkin's poverty is actually a virtue rather than a sin, as we see in Gogol. And also, I believe that Konstantinopol'skii creates a very rich texture where he brings together many, not only Gogol's texts, but other films. The soundtrack is extremely important. He adds Dubrovsky through Grebenshchikov's song, and the adaptation of Dubrovsky as well to the picture. And Inspector General, and even the TV series The Thaw is also there, also thanks to the soundtrack. So I do believe that it's a very original and rich adaptation. But again, I'd like to stress that the more adaptations there are of a single text, the better, because they participate in a very in a complex polylogue then. And none of them tries to replace the text.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But you have a personal interest. You are a scholar of adaptations. You need more of them, and more and different of them, a variety of them, right? And the normal viewer wants to have a finite adaptation, the one that sort of would translate his internal vision of the given text onto the screen.
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, no, I'm just I'm abnormal. That's it goes without saying. So, colleagues, do you have any opposing positions? Maybe different.
I would just say that undergraduate students come into classes asking if the adaptation is faithful, right? And there's this whole vocabulary of fidelity and infidelity, which is pretty bizarre, actually, when you're talking about films and books. And so we usually start by kind of deconstructing that vocabulary of fidelity, and also just talking about the fact that I'm teaching in North America. Everything I'm teaching is in translation. It's already a kind of adaptation. We're just living in this kind of constant adaptation. And we sort of go from there. I haven't had many students insist, on this question of faithfulness, probably because I don't have Russian students and they're not particularly emotionally invested already in these texts. Now, if it were Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, I think they have very specific visions and they could be much more offended.
Exactly. Yes, Harry Potter is much more touchy subject than Gogol, right? So we won't go into this direction. Ilya, do you want to say something here? Thank you, Annie. Thank you.
Nothing valuable.
No, okay, all right. Let's move on then.
If there are no more, I was going to say if there are no more valuable additions, but if we're done with this one, I'd like to move to the second question. And before I do so, just for our audiences who watched Gogol's Dead Souls, I highly recommend watching Konstantinopol'skii adaptation of Groza, of Ostrovsky's play, The Storm, that was released in the summer of 2019. It's not a multi-series project, it's just a single 90-minute film that is pretty good. And Victoria Tolstoganova, who plays Madame Sobakevich in this one, is Kabanicha, and she is probably the most terrifying Kabanicha I could have ever imagined. So strong recommendation there. Let's go back a little bit towards the literary source of this adaptation. So, if we consider theater productions that were shot on film, Russia and the USSR together in the past century produced about 8 screen adaptations of Dead Souls, the number that is closely rivaled only by Anna Karenina. And since 1969, a new film version of Gogol's novel has appeared approximately every 10 to 15 years. How would you explain this cultural need to return to the text on such a regular basis? And if Dead Souls is a microcosm of Russia, what does this microcosm represent in 2021?
Well, if I may, maybe you can sort of hypothetically speculate. Is there any historical logic between the desire to create another screen version of the Dead Souls? Of course, there are contingencies of the production, but is there some kind of breathing of history behind that? Yeah, Mila, please. But we won't let the historian go with this question.
As a historian, I can only quote the director of my Russian PhD dissertation, who used to say, folks can do whatever they want. I mean, any topic will do, and anyway, and also he repeated that even if someone is working on a topic very similar to yours or almost identical to yours, no two studies will be the same anyway. So, I mean, as a historian, don't see a problem here.
You reject the idea of any logic. All right, okay.
But why Dead Souls then? Why not any other novel with such frequency? Why not Untitled?
I have an answer for about 8-9 minutes long, or the short one. Why not?
All right, so if we have 8-9 minutes, we'll get back to that. But now let Mila suggest what is her vision of that.
I think there are several reasons, and one, Alexander Barry has an interesting theory of why some texts attract more adaptations, more film directors than others. And he thinks that the answer is in open-endedness of certain texts. And Gogol's text without the proper ending somehow requires from the directors to finish it, to give their own interpretation. Also, the mystery in the center, in this combination of the fantastic and the realistic, is very attractive. The combination of the road movie and the picaresque novel, which allows you to show very different places of Russia, very different interiors in this case, and very different portraits, is definitely productive. And also I think in general, the aura, all the texts, all the interpretations of the novel also play the role. It is very attractive to try to adapt this Russian divine comedy and Russian Ulysses. So every time it will be an epic endeavor. So I think it requires courage from the directors. But I would say the mystery, the open-endedness, and just an opportunity to present Russia in a microcosm is significant here.
And in that sense, I think that Gogol won. I mean, because he basically wrote what is in many ways a genuinely mysterious and confusing book, and made sure that everybody thought that the question the book was asking is, what is Russia, right? Or whither Russia? Or what is Russia really about? So everything that confuses you about the book becomes kind of generative. And that's also a good thing for a filmmaker, right? It's kind of inexhaustible. It's like symbolic. It's deep in a way. And it doesn't require extremely, it doesn't require a degree of historical specificity that, like War and Peace or something is going to. So I think that too really contributes to, I would imagine, contributes to its appeal.
I fully agree. The fact, the questions Gogol asks, where are you going, Russia? And the relationship between Russia and the world outside, they invite the directors to give their own answers.
And there's also this. No, I was just going to say that since Mila mentioned Russia and the world outside, and there is always the kind of, I don't want to say the universality of that relationship, but there's something that definitely transcends centuries. And there is a reference to the whole Zaprishonka and their relationship with the West that got this very material form in the mid to 2010s, when just kind of the ties that existed that people may not have been aware of because they exist on the level of the everyday, suddenly were terminated, at least partially. So I think that's one of the ways that he did ground that in the film.
I actually have a question for my fellow panelists who work on film. That's a kind of more specific question about the costumes and about the sets and sort of about the material world of the film. And Dasha, maybe you've thought of this too, is I think that they could have done much more with that. In Gogol's text, there are these specific objects that attract a bizarre amount of the narrator's attention, you know, where all of a sudden you sort of zoom in on an embroidered toothpick holder. And that embroidered toothpick holder then takes up an entire paragraph and kind of swells to fill, you know, all of this attention. And I didn't see much in the way of real, you know, the different houses of the different chinovniki, they had, the decor was marked a little bit in each one, but it wasn't particularly interesting. And the same with the clothes. I think that more could have been done with the kind of material world.
I'm so thankful that you said it, Anne, because I was rewatching the series today, and the thing that really bugged me, and I have no idea why, was that kulich that Plyushkin serves Chichikov, that Mavra brings, is not stale. It is stale in the book. It's a stale kulich, and I, for some reason, thought that this was such an abomination that's of the kind of the entire surroundings of the character. This, for some reason, stuck with me, that this is not the kind of kulich that he serves. So I think on some level, I do agree that not enough maybe was done, and not quite in the way that I personally expected it to be done, even for a modern adaptation. Didn't mean to, but
isn't every kulich after Easter is stale by default? So
there is a close-up of the
kulich.
There is a close-up of the kulich, well, not a close-up, but a mid-shot of the kulich. You can see that it's not stale, and that's morally wrong. I'm kidding, it's not.
You know better. Ilya wanted to say something.
Very briefly, that this is a translation, and translation, among other things, from the early first half of 19th century to the 21st century. It's mass society, mass-produced materiality, and there is attention to different details. You mentioned the Moscow plates. It's not just Moscow plates. It's the series known for the plates that is reserved for the Moscow government. So it's not randomly generated plates. There is meticulous attention to details in this film, only not to the Italian suits or Chinese produced electronics or something else, or the food from the supermarket. It's about other detail. The semiotics is rich, but it's certainly shifted to another plane of materiality, symbolically marked materiality.
It's just that in Gogol, there are these moments of attention to materiality that are actually not symbolically marked, that are just weird, right? And Nabokov calls them a weird sticking outness. It's a sort of, I mean, for lack of a better term, a sort of avant-garde sensibility, right? It's kind of like in your face. That, I can certainly see your point about the Moscow plates and a different sort of semiotics of what details matter, but I guess I just didn't see the weirdness that I might.
But if I may remind you, the portrait of Nozdryov on the top of the horse, followed by the story how this horse was brought into his marble floored room.
Yeah, that was great.
The horse was wearing varing. I don't know how to translate that.
That was pretty good.
Not to break the floor. So I think it's some materiality.
Yeah,
and it's very believable. And
I quite like the fact that you know, when the Manilovs are introduced, and in Gogol, like, I think one of the first things that they say is that "Dushenька, открой ротик, я положу тебе этот кусочек," and she gives him, I think it's acid that she gives him.
Acid, of course,
that was pretty good. That was.
And by the way, it's also a proof that it is a good adaptation, because such episodes stand on their own, but they are much funnier when you know the original. Like in the scene when Chichikov and Selifan are stuck before going to Korobochka and lost in the field, and it's very funny to compare the episode of Selifan overturning the carriage in the original and in Schweizer's classical adaptation, and here the car that is stuck in the marsh. But in general, all our problems with this adaptation come from the fact that we believe that the adaptation owes, that the text is the main thing, the source of everything, and adaptations are secondary. But it is a very ironic interpretation, which has its own goals. And is it really just to judge this series that was made, as Mark mentioned, in a very short span of time, and Gogol's text, one of the most important in his life. So I think that not having high expectations helps to appreciate the film.
Okay.
Mark, can I just jump in really quick, because I'm still haunted by the Чехольчик для зубочистки and all of the other sticky outedness, the thing that Anne brought up. I'm thinking that also that one probably doesn't catch those individual things, but on second viewing, so many references stand out to just other popular culture and middlebrow kind of artifacts in the series that might get lost unless you're really plugged into what's going on in Russian TV and cinema. There is a kind of an extended reference to «Обычная женщина» when Agafia Tikhonovna interviews the woman who sleeps with Selifan and says, "Oh, I slipped him some phenazepam and like he now's out," which kind of implies that Agafia Tikhonovna is actually running a prostitution ring, because very clearly is, and Mikhalkova plays an «Обычная женщина». Then there are multiple references to Russian cinema and quotes that don't belong neither in Gogol nor in anything that might be remotely related to Dead Souls. So in this kind of classically postmodern oversaturation with references, some of them might be completely dead end, but they do bury, I think, those nice little singular moments in each separate description. I think they maybe tried to do it, but it just there's too much noise otherwise going on. Mark, sorry, you were gonna.
No, but that's a great addition. We start to receive questions into Q&A, and I really encourage our audience to send questions, and we'll certainly address them. But so far, I have one of the questions that we need to ask sort of as the most important question. So other than transporting the plot of the novel to present-day Russia and adjusting historical detail accordingly, does Konstantinopol'skii have an original conceptualization of the familiar plot, right? What is the conception of this thing? Okay, and we already mentioned that souls are turned into the places next to VIP graves, right, which may be occupied by people and VIPs who are still alive, right? We already mentioned that Plyushkin suddenly is transformed into the most noble character, at least the one who is not as corrupt as other characters in the film. Right? There are multiple others. Nandryov is depicted as the avid and eternally drunken reconstructor of historical events that happened a year and a half ago, though, and of course a very much enthusiastic supporter of the Donbass operation and other patriotic escapades. So all these are funny details, right? Funny additions, but do they connect into some conceptualization? So what are your takes? Yes, Mila.
I believe they do, and it's a very serious question in the center of this film about revisiting the past and manipulating the memory, and to some extent, vulnerability of the dead, because Vysotsky cannot choose who is going to lie near him. And after all, it was Chichekov's mission to acquire the list of the important figures from the regions to prepare them for reburying in the center. So the film again revisits the official hierarchies of power. So I would say that it's a film about creating a new narrative of the past and reburying the old corpses, the new corpses, creating this new hierarchy. And of course, it's only appropriate that for such a message, the director chose the genre of adaptation, revisiting the classical text. But in the case of adaptation, it's not reburying, but resurrecting. I disagree, by the way, with Ilya that adaptation only uses the cultural capital of the text. I think that in contemporary world, adaptation is the way to keep classical texts alive.
But don't you think that then sort of comparing it with the all-known plot, right? There were dead souls that can be transformed into the money, right? And so at least there is some very important social, political, economic reality behind this complicated operation of Chichikov, right? Here it is the pure selling and buying of the symbolic. So it is the market of the symbolic, not only. No, Dasha disagrees, I can see.
I know, I don't disagree. I was just going to say that I think that's part of the Konstantinopol'skii plot because he says, as part of Программа реновации in Moscow, реновация, and no one ever mentions what this реновация is. So there is fundamentally already the abstraction from the very start that it seems like we all know what реновация should stand for, but we don't. We just know that cemeteries are involved. So allegedly it has some kind of real form, but it's not in the series. It's not a given.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what
let's go on. Yeah, and
when I was talking about the just counting paper money in a room at the end. It essentially I was gesturing toward the same point that you just made, Mark.
About selling that. I'm sorry, I didn't want to, but all right. Then we'll expand on that. But Ilya probably has something to say.
I would
about
say that
conceptualization.
It's interesting to see. There are many different ways to see the Konstantinopol'skii's product, but what's most interesting to me is to approach it as an ideal adaptation of Gogol as the main means. I mean, in its own right, and there is nothing beyond that ideal adaptation of Gogol. So everything that was mentioned, the premise, the plot premise of this burial next to classics, or it's again another metaphor for adaptation. So any adaptation wants to add, I mean, director wants to add his name to this pantheon of great predecessors. So it's all another metaphor, and anything that was mentioned, it's again about the adaptation itself. But what's the purpose of this adaptation? I suggest this is the most accurate adaptation of the ideal of the of Dead Souls, as the programmatic text, as not just the story, the plot, but the Gogol's philosophy and existentialism that Gogol expressed in his poem.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And what's your take on what is Dead Souls by Konstantinopol'skii? Didn't mean to call you like that, but do you have any? What is Dead Souls by Konstantinopol'skii to you?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
If that addressed to me? I think it's the cash nexus, basically. I mean, I think it's just turning everything into money and then circulating the money around. That's what it seemed to me. I mean, at least Chichikov had to try to turn the money into land, and himself, in Gogol's Chichikov, himself into a landowner, but there's no need to do that for this Chichikov. I mean, until the FSB intervenes and it turns out it was all just a sting operation. I'm kind of bracketing that. So yeah, that's what it seemed like to me. And to your point about renovacija, like renovacija of what, whatever, doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, because it's all going to be turned into money, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
adaptation, renovation, renovacija, it's adaptation. Another word for adaptation of classics too. I mean, it's make it new again, relevant again, and exactly.
Exactly.
All right, Mila, go ahead. Yeah.
But by the way, it's not only about the money. The money, as we see, is not the final product of the operation. It's about the result of American elections.
We'll return to
I
this.
was not sure how seriously to take that.
Of course, it's not, but it is a joke, of course. But let me ask this question, Dasha, just a little appendix to the question, right? So since Ilya already mentioned the trickster, and I cannot keep silent about the tricksters, so certainly Мертвые души, the original text, right, had two tricksters, right? One was the absolutely destructive, if carnivalesque trickster Nozdrев, and this quality is completely transferred here, right? And another was a very serious, but still a trickster, Chichikov, right? He was a picaro, he was a rock, he was the man of sort of economic interest and instrumental reason, but they were just two tricksters. And the question of whether Chichikov, he is the trickster, deserves separate attention. But what I couldn't help noticing that all of them are tricksters here. Here, we don't see any major character that is not trickster. Manilov with his wife, who are constantly singing, taking drugs, and dragging Chichikov into their bed for various sexual games, right? The governor who constantly sort of playing sly games, right? And all this is accompanied by songs, which are also adaptations of very famous songs, right? And even Kapitan Kopeikin is very playfully represented. At first, we see Tsiganov, who is at the same time Chichikov, because he is accused that he is, of course, Kapitan Kopeikin. And then in the ending, there appears Ivan Охлобыстин, a very, very problematic political character who is also associated with lots of scandalous statements, and the role of the jester in Lungin's version of Ivan the Terrible, right? So everyone is the trickster here. What is the point of this conceptualization, of this transformation? It's quite radical, I would say. Ilya, you're making facial movements, so probably you should articulate.
No,
louder, please. Speak up, please.
Most concise way to answer this question is that unknowingly Gogol made trickster, and this was the topic of my second intervention. Unknowingly himself, because he didn't read the charms of the 11th book. Unknowingly, he made trickster not just the protagonist, but the main language of his, the constituent principle of the poem, and the main language of the poem. So tricksterness is embedded in the poem, and when and this becomes the most problematic element for Gogol, because when he attempted to get rid of tricksterism and switch into plain language, everything collapses. And that's, so you get to the point, as always, Mark, yeah, right? And that's why, this is for the third time I have to repeat this is the ideal adaptation of Gogol, because Konstantinopol'skii explicates some things that Gogol didn't quite understand, obviously, himself, by making everyone this tricksteresque. He clarifies the essence of the text in my opinion, of Gogol's design.
Okay, thank you. And what do you think as a literary scholar?
I don't have as global a take on it as Ilya, but it was that this sort of tricksterness of the various chinovniki reminded me of Revizor, more as much as Mjorfidushi, where the chinovniki in the town, they're both playing and being played at the same time, and that was that reminded me. That seemed to be one of the places where Revizor was being brought in to the Dead Souls plot.
I agree with Anne, because at first it seems that the chinovniki are much more successful tricksters than Chichikov himself, and he is not able to get any money from most of them, and he thinks that he is being played. But later, it seems as if they decide to make him win. Because Chichikov is definitely not the most successful one. It requires their cooperation for his project to be successful, which is the plot of Revizor.
And then there are those moments when Silifan becomes Khrestakov. Silifan starts talking in Khristakov's words, which is absolutely wonderful. Tysяча Kurierov and all these, he kind of adapts Khristakov's monologues from Revizor, and that was also wonderful and confusing to me at the same time. It kind of blew my mind. Great.
And Konstantinopol'skii is not the first film director adapting Dead Souls to do it, because in the case of Dead Souls by Longin, with the script by Yuri Arabov, he did the same, amalgamating the plots of Dead Souls and Revizor.
Just like my students do.
All right. I'm sorry, Mila, did I interrupt?
No, I just to say that in Longin's version, the character, the main character becomes a victim of the officials, almost like we think at a certain moment Chichikov does in this film. But then it is a postmodern take on Gogol, and there are several times when the plot is overturned.
We'll hopefully get back to the question of Revizor in a bit. Now to kind of switch gears a little bit, it's been brought up already in this conversation that there is a pivotal point in the series, pretty much halfway through it, that the kind of the possible political implications are coming through, and that's usually when the opinions become really polarized about the series. So we're going to be going a little more into that direction for the remainder of our conversation. And my question here is, has to do with the references to the war in Donbass and the annexation of Crimea. They're frequently made in the series, sort of half-jokingly most of the time. These references become particularly noticeable in Nozdrov's character and later on in the figure of Captain Kopeikin. How do you interpret these references? Why bring up Donbass, and do you think they are in any way compelling in the series?
Ilya, that's for you. You should respond. For politics is your responsibility.
Yeah. We cannot. I mean, a meaningful answer would require to distance from this, from perceiving this as a single piece. I mean, not a single. It's a single piece, of course, but it's not a monological sequential piece. And I insist that it's important for meaningful analysis to discuss separately two parts of this series. So if we don't do this, I mean, we have this critical Nozdrov statement on Donbass, then we have apologetic in the second part. And together they just don't make any sense, that they're two mutually exclusive statements. Why mentioning Donbass at all? Well, I mean, somehow perhaps this is because this was a very suitable way to translate Nazdarov's character from 1840s to the 2020s and to adapt to our realities using this, story. Maybe not the only one available. 15 years ago, he would be just a gangster. Just a middle level or just low level streetwise guys at the time when they shoot Brigada and other series. But again, a combination of this jingoism with the stamp of authoritarian approval, authoritative approval. This produces this Donbass idiom, combination of self-organization and again transgression, and at the same time officially, totally legal and officially approved. So hence the Donbass.
But two questions. Question, comment. First of all, where do you see the apologetic representation?
Apologetic with Kapitan Kopeikin's guerrillas, who are presumably same. In the fourth episode, the same Donbass folks who are this motley crew of drunkards in the first episode, on all this scum, and suddenly they became these ideal fighters for truth, Russian soul and whatnot, coming from the forest to save the protagonist. This is total drag trip. I would dismiss this, but otherwise it's perfectly symmetrical to the description of these guys in the first episode.
Yes and no, because before Donbass we knew about Primorsky Partisani, and of course here is Dubrovsky's reference.
Kopeikin came from Donbass, not from Primorsky Partisani.
Kopeikin, yes.
So Kopeikin is their leader. They probably his comrades in arms. I don't think that there is much disagreement of where these folks came from.
I don't know. Maybe, but I could quite buy the idea that the Donbass goes both ways, for the officially supported, although under the table, jingoism, and for the jingoism that turns into the sort of anarchist people's rebellion, guerrilla war, something like that. Mila, you want to say something?
Yes, I was thinking that the Donbass reference confirms my interpretation of this adaptation being a commentary on the structure of the space, Russian periphery, center, and the border between, because it raises the question whether Donbass, what territory it is. It raises the question of Russian border. And that's why it's very relative. And also it's the second adaptation of Russian classics I know that combines this classical text with the topic of the war in Donbass in a very relevant way. And the first one is Laznitsa, the Meek one, that does it in a much more subtle manner, because at first you hear some fragments of the news about the war on the radio, and then you hear the stories about fragments of corpses, and somehow the plot line becomes surreal, and finally it reaches the climax in the scene of a huge disintegration, annihilation of the matter, and where you realize that the whole film has been about this event, the war in Donbass. And I think that Konstantinopol'skii also returns us to this huge problem of Russian geopolitical conflicts taking place now.
But don't you think that in this scene in the office of the Moscow boss, when Kapitan Kopeikin, imagine Kapitan Kopeikin is being refused in pension. Basically, we see that the entire Donbass operation is also some kind of a trick, because as the boss tells Kopeikin, right? Yes, you are a veteran, but we cannot pay you because you did this out of the purity of your
Because
patriotic heart.
officially our troops are not there, is what he says.
And our troops are not
officially
there.
Our troops are not there.
So here, I think the subject of tricksterdom sort of is stretching to the political spheres quite literally.
Absolutely, and I think it's great revelation of the hypocrisy of the authorities, because it mocks the official versions that there is no war in Donbass.
Mm-hmm. So continuing this topic and
go ahead, Mark.
Continuing this topic and continuing what you already touched upon, that Revisor is somewhat incorporated into the plot, and incorporated in the way that made Ilya to close his eyes while he was watching the final episode of the film, and also marks it as very problematic with the finale when it turns out that Chichikov is the planted FSB officer, right, and the FSB is appearing as the judge sort of this entire operation, right, or behind of this operation, and of course there lots of problem comes with the idea of the good FSB agent, which here serves as the sort of good incarnation of the inspector general. So what do you think of this? What do you think about this? Is it ironic, or is it meant to be taken for face value? Is Konstantinopol'skii pandering to official cultural politics, or is he trolling the cliches of state-sponsored cinema and TV that often include this image in their productions? What do you think? And it's your turn to begin.
You know, this is one, and I already told Dasha this, I leave this one to you. My first inclination was to think that this has to be trolling because it seems so over the top. The FSB guys seem kind of cartoonish with their Kevlar vests and their big heads. But, I don't know, maybe that's Konstantinopol'skii's politics. I leave that to you. You probably know better than I do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ilya, it's your turn to explain your repulsion.
I need a longer answer. The short answer, it doesn't make
Okay, provide the longer. It's
it's
okay.
meaningless to discuss.
We have time.
We have time.
We have time.
It's meaningless to discuss any direct political statements of the last episodes of the series, the third and fourth episode. They are meaningless. They are superficial. You can attach to them, ascribe to them whatever meaning you want, because FSB is a good case in point, because you want to read this as loyalists. There are certain state interests. There are certain state interests. Okay, because they are in the end punishing all these corrupt officials. It's subversive, tongue-in-cheek. Yes, it's subversive because, this picture, if you Google the latest colonel name, FSB colonel, I mean, the fact that they're stashing this cash in private apartment, I mean, this is a very recognizable picture from recent raids on FSB and in police officers who keep their illegal funds общак, and this is clearly this quotation from these recent raids. This is not the state money. But there is the third possibility. You can read this as cynical statement, because the last conversation with this colonel of FSB in the car, about their sending money to Comrade Biden. I mean, this is holy crap. Donald is our guy. Donald is our guy. We're afraid of Biden because allegedly Dems will punish Putin and the regime. What money is sent? I mean, why if they send money to? I mean, this last episode is key to read it as a just absurd, meaningless, just collage of statements that by themselves mean nothing. It's meaningless because Biden didn't need Russian money. Russians wouldn't pay Biden because interested, historically speaking, politically speaking, in Trump's victory, not Biden's. And because if you want to pay Biden, you don't stash this money in private apartment, but there are other ways to do this. I mean, there are three possibilities. They're equally possible, and they're equally possible, I would argue, exactly because the artistic structure, the artistic fabric of the film is disintegrated into individual threads and political statements along them. So you want to pick this thread, you are totally entitled for this. And the other film will give you material to substantiate just the opposite statement. The same with Captain Kapekin and then these guerrillas and the FSB and the entire story. That's the point of Konstantinopol'skii as someone who is going very close after Gogol's intention to present this as a meaningless and superficial, just I mean, circus-like superficial play of life that is so beyond the inner spiritual essence of things of the spiritual world.
Thank you, Ilya. I can see that Dasha disagree.
Yeah, I think I do disagree. But I'll keep my comments to myself and right. Up until the speaker.
Don't keep them to yourself. Say something. Oh, maybe Mila wants to speak first, but you shouldn't keep. Yeah. All right, Mila, you speak first, but then Dasha, you should speak.
I had serious problems with the ending of the film, and I wonder, Mark, if this movie falls under your definition of thoughts, because there is certain relativity. I think that it is absence. It is not present in Gogol's text, but is present in the film. And I think that Konstantinopol'skii refuses to make a stance. And he, on the one hand, and he appeals, as Ilya says, to different audiences. And he protects himself, creating his ending in this way. On the one hand, stylistically, it is an exaggerated parody, and you cannot take it for face value. And also, the cynical version of the ending contradicts many statements he actually does in the film. For example, the scene of the trial. On the other hand, it would appeal to those who decide to take it for face value. It reminded me of Mr. Parker's project, the site VladimirVladimirovich.ru, which on the one hand contains some jokes about Putin, and the opposition liked these jokes. But on the other hand, if you read them attentively, they present the president they glorify, valorize Putin, ironically, but still quite seriously. So I do find this ability, this freedom Konstantinopol'skii gives his audience to read it in different ways problematic.
Thank you, Dasha. What do you think?
I have feelings about this question, so I gotta say, like, I'm not sure that people will agree with me, but my take on this is as follows. So as I'm sure you looked at the reviews in the Russian press, and quite many of them mentioned that the series is unsalvageable. Like, it's really good at first, but it's unsalvageable at the end because it glorifies, like, it's jingoistic, it glorifies the current politics. I find that profoundly unconvincing because, judging from the ending itself, I don't think that there is any way to take it at face value, period. I think that the last episode of this series is just entirely trolling. Like, that can, if you assume that there is a serious in praise of the government message anywhere in that, there immediately would emerge contradictions within how it is being represented cinematically. None of this can really be serious, which is not to say that there isn't a political message to the film. I think Nozdryov is so great just because Konstantinopol'skii created this machine of just constant patriotic gibberish, just always reenactment, always we're reenacting the great battle of 18 months ago. Okay. I think that has in itself more political critique than the ending and the raids and the big reveal of Chichikov as being the state's functionary. What I think the ending is about, cinema. I don't think it's about politics at all. I think this is his way to respond to a trend that has manifested itself pretty strongly in contemporary Russian film, especially the state-sponsored film, that does present the image of a good FSB officer in earnest. And I think with his ending, Konstantinopol'skii is trying to work against that. If you're planning to attend our next event on March 23rd, that will be about Dear Comrades, the Konchalovsky film. There, for instance, there genuinely is a chisel-faced, jawline for days KGB officer who saves the day in a film that is quite literally about the state shooting at people. So I think Konstantinopol'skii's ending is to be interpreted, in my view, strictly in the cinema, in terms of the cinematic form and the kind of trends in cinema and TV that have emerged more than the political. And I have said what I had to say.
For me, the sort of revelation came when I watched the second time, and I should admit that at first I also was not very comfortable with this ending. But when I watched this film, this series, for the second time, there is this very important episode with Plushkin when he sort of convinces him to buy the plot next to Fyodor Bondarchuk and sort of to massage his ego this way. And Plushkin gives up all his life savings that he was saving for the film to make that he never makes, right? And it is quite obvious that he is not a thief, that he is not involved into corruption. But Chichikov presses hard, right? He says, no, 7 million won't do. We need 10 million minimum, right? And that forces him to give the budget for this libraries system of the district, etc., etc. So obviously Chichikov is pushing him towards criminal act, and actually there is some kind of contradiction there, because as we remember, Plushkin takes back the money, right? Takes back the money, but he is nevertheless arrested in the end, although he is offered to be a witness. But what for is he arrested? I don't fathom. I don't understand, right? So, but in this episode, we can see that the role of the moral judge, of the sort of positive figure standing above them, does not belong to Chichikov. He sort of he tricks all his characters, including this one, who doesn't. He's not no Voland. Let's put it bluntly, right? He just wants to trick, and basically, I think it's quite important that what Mila noticed in the beginning, and what Anne noticed in comparison with Revizorov, that the city is called Bugorsk. Bugor in Russian sort of colloquial language is the boss. So it's the city of the bosses. right? And that's exactly what we see in Revizor. It is the city of the bosses. It is the model of not just province, the model of the state, right? And the higher state operates with this smaller state in the same way as they're operating with their subjects. So basically, continuing what I was trying to what is my take here is that here tricksterdom becomes the state policy. Tricksterdom is not it's manifested through particular characters, right? But basically we are dealing with the state as the trickster, and state that sort of doesn't operate in other modality and doesn't know on any other modality. In this respect, what Ilya says about sort of almost cynical opportunism of Konstantinopol'skii, so you may interpret it in any way possible, is a mimicry. Is a form of mimicry, but the mimicry that is at the same time a mockery. Would you agree with this? Ilya?
I mean, I don't think that this is for someone who is trying to produce an ideal adaptation of Gogol, this is not the most important relevant question. It's a legitimate question. We can discuss it, not for Konstantinopol'skii, I believe.
Okay, all right. Any other? Mila, what is it?
I believe it's very convenient to have a mimicry and mockery at the same time because it opens up all possibilities of interpretation without the director making the final, taking the final stance. Although I like Daria's interpretation of the ending being about cinema too, but this openness is problematic. Too relativist ending.
Thank you. Anne, what do you think?
I think in the end, I'm probably most persuaded by Dasha's explanation, but I remain quite confused by the ending.
All right. Okay, on this optimistic note, we should move to the questions from the audience, I think. So we have two questions from Elena Baraban. Hello, Elena. The first one, whoever wants to answer it. I thought that the post-Soviet reincarnations of many former landowners were done brilliantly in the film. I think what Konstantinopol'skii does is more interesting and more valid as a conceptualization of today's Russia than what Akunin does with the Russian classics. So Nozdrov, Manilov, Plyushkin, and even Korobotchka were done excellently. Konstantinopol'skii could replant then very successfully into post-Soviet Russia, but Sobakevich was not so interesting. Any thoughts on that? Sobakevich in Gogol's text, remember the Sturgeon scene, was more interesting. What would be a better post-Soviet karma for Sobakevich? Any suggestions? And any explanation why Sobakevich? Yes. And
yes, sir.
Karma is a Manilov, of course, right? And
yeah, this doesn't speak to the Sobakevich question, but just the question of landowners in our time. I mean, these in 2021, they don't have to be landowners, right? They just have to be rich, and land is one of the things they buy with their money, and that's a huge difference between our time and Gogol's time. Is that there was such a thing as a landowner, and that was a or Soslovia, and now there's just people with a lot of money, and sometimes the thing that they buy with their money is land. So that seems really different. And I didn't particularly find Sobakevich to be less effective than the other incarnations. But if he was, maybe it's because in the novel he is so landed, right? He's absolutely like rooted into the ground. He's this giant bear. He's almost covered with fur. And I don't know, I would be interested to hear more about what other people thought about this question of landness.
Thank you. Yes,
ironically, in this respect too, Konstantinopol'skii is faithful to Gogol. These people are really short on cash. I know they, like Korobotchka, they live this lavish lifestyle because they, and this is the political economy of Putin's Russia, they have privatized public offices. And public offices, as initially the idea of gentry state, the поместья, is that they're feeding them, providing them with everything. So yes, you can drive Maybachs and live in palaces, but these are not really yours. You have difficulty cashing this. I mean, accumulating bribes, yeah, but it's not just because they are greedy, they don't want to pay him upfront, the Chichikov upfront. There's a real problem of liquidity. And Sobakevich, I have to, that's a very good question. And Elena is right, because since reading this for the first time at school, this is, Sobakevich is one of the favorites, of course, because he's the most live character. And I would say that it's bad luck. Everyone who happened to get into the second part of the film, of the series, third and fourth episodes, they're out of luck. I mean, this is bad. Strictly speaking, this is bad quality, artistic quality film. This is bad artistic language, not because it's done on purpose, but it's just because everyone is so, there are no live characters, interactions, dialogues are cringy. You can see how Nozdrov changes. I mean, you see how it was a pleasure to play this role in the first episode or in the first part of the series, and how the actor struggles, because it's like your typical Russian series. I mean, you don't have material to play. The script is horrible. The circumstances are so artificial that you feel yourself encaged there. Look at Mikhalkova, not that she's, in my humble opinion, a good actress or something, but Duzhev was great at the beginning. I never expected this guy to be a good actor, but Manilov.
And Duzhev playing Manilov, for those who haven't seen it.
Fabulous. Yeah. And this Mikhalkov, and everyone struggles. Everyone, and Sobakevich fell victim of this great grand design of the series that mimics Gogol's grand design. And so he has to be this lifeless depiction of function, social, political, artistic program, but not a three-dimensional character. And that's my explanation what happened to this, one of the best, most live and color personages of Gogol's poem.
I would say that the irony of Sobakevich's image is that he is the Minister of Culture of this, which is a very strange post of Bugorsk. And so the fact that he is chosen to voice the values, ethical values, and Russian identity, I think, is a rather good find of Konstantinopol'skii. And also, if you noticed, his wife owns a network of dry cleaning services and cleaning services. And this combination of Ministry of Culture and dry cleaning, Ministerstvo kultury is himчистка.
Прачечная, of course.
Was quite hilarious.
Yeah.
But yeah. No, so I just thought that Anne, I think, had a comment, so.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's kind of, I mean, it's strange to talk about any of Gogol's characters as three-dimensional. I don't think that Gogol has ever written a three-dimensional character. So if Sobakevich is somehow failing, I don't think it's because he's three-dimensional. There must be something else that we're experiencing there. So that's one thing. And then another thing, to respond to what Ilya was saying, it's really fascinating how successfully the film is able to translate landowners into chinovniki, and I really appreciate your point that it's because both of these groups are constantly short on cash and dependent.
Another form of rent. They're rent holders. It's another form of rent.
Yeah, they're rentiers, basically. They're like rentier capitalists. And they're constantly dependent on, you know, other powers. And so it completely makes sense that you would be able, because otherwise, when I first started watching, I thought, how is he going to make landowners who live off of serfs? How's he going to translate that into sort of government servitors? And it actually works because of the way the government works at our particular moment. So that was a really interesting point. Thank you.
You're right about the dimension. It's just probably the wrong term. It's just the intensity of characters that suddenly become bloodless somehow in the end, and just the shadows of what they used to be.
I mean, this is where I would go back to actually the material environment and the things like sets and costumes that I think actually could have made somebody like Sabakievich have more of a physical presence to which we would have responded. Because I agree, he's not particularly memorable.
Probably you're right, but I think that Roba, who is one of the most organic characters, actors in today's TV, he plays a very clear history as Milan Dodževsky. He is a minister of culture, and that's, by the way, a very typical position in every regional government. В каждой области есть министр культуры, and so, but he's obviously a former thug, a former gangster. Remember how he negotiates with Chichikov? He just grabs him on the throat and says, joking, I'm kidding. So the former gangster who is becoming the Minister of Culture, and of course Pratichna and Minister of Culture, they connect in the same joke, and so he's a walking joke, right? And that's what he's
well,
playing.
If the governor is gangster, if the governor is gangster, why do you expect something else from? I mean, literally. We first time we see him, if he plays with knife, this is this popular pastime of convicts playing with knife.
I don't expect much. I agree.
So yeah.
But yes, Anne, please go ahead.
Can I just ask just a question about the female characters who are all basically kind of standing like a chorus line behind these male characters, and it's fascinating that these business women or whatever they're called are providing in some way the money for these chinovniki to live the way they do. I just was wondering what people thought of the way that these female characters were playing.
It seems to be an open mockery of the political reality, when it's not the mayor who owns the plants, the factories, but the wife. So I actually liked this ironic interpretation, because when you look at them, you cannot miss the discrepancy between them being successful business women and their lifelessness, mostly as characters.
I do find one female character in this adaptation quite interesting and confusing in some ways, but she doesn't come from Gogol. It's the woman who seems to constantly be emceeing the endless corporative, and ultimately finds out that Chichikov, from Selifan, that Chichikov is a government official. I couldn't quite place her, but I think that the whole idea of this endless corporative as an endless carnival that is just never stops. Everyone is beaten up. Everyone has to sing either Leps or Vysotsky in a horrible rendition, is presided over.
Or Ottipil, right?
Or Ottipil. But it is presided over by the one character that is most certainly not a forgettable one, along with Mikhail Koval.
Someone is in a review mentioned this lynch motive in the series. It's like a Twin Peaks bar where you have this music playing, and and in fact she is indeed a master of ceremony of sorts, not just technically, but she defines the flow of the narrative, and she defines the meaning of the narrative. Because it's a long story, I don't want to go into the details. Music is central for understanding the language of the movie. And starting from the music for the opening credits, because usually in a series you have some trademark soundtrack that opens every episode. Here you have 4 episodes opening with music individually selected. And for example, the first is opened, of course, with Chukowski Piano Concerto No. 1, and this is what pianist Andrei Gavrilov wrote about in his English book about Tchaikovsky Concert No. 1. Tchaikovsky Concerto No. 1 is a huge hit nowadays. No other classical piece is played so often, including performances at countless competitions. This constant repetition has discredited and exhausted this wonderful, delicate work. This musical work, however, is woven from melodical modulations of the human soul. This singing, symphonic philosophy of life, this sweet Russian symphonic existentialism belongs possibly to the top 10 greatest creations of human genius. And this is, I would say, we may read this characteristic as Konstantinopol'skii declaration of intentions, why he decided to adopt Dead Souls, and what is more important to him, politics or the human soul. And then we have the second, and so on. And it's all meaningful, very meaningful, what he chooses as the music for opening credits in subsequent episodes. But about these covers that immediately draws one attention, and my favorite is Vysotsky, of course, the Gypsy song. It's just absolutely crazy. In the first part of the series, you have, and I wrote down all of them and checked them. You have only covers, and usually it's female voice with one exception, singing the songs famously associated with male performers, the Vysotsky, Dalia Onofriev, Serega. In the second part, you have only authentic tracks, only authentic records, including absolutely redundant full performance of Grebenshchikov's Dubrovsky, which could be truncated, cut, but present in full with this fake Grebenshchikov singing it in the. It's all the music is authentic. People performing their own songs. First part, the only covers. And in my interpretation, this explains how Konstantinopol'skii translates the main philosophical idea of Gogol. And this is the key. What happens is that the first part of the series, the first section episode and the second, they're actually constructed from 3 absolutely crazy individual elements. Everyone by itself is absolutely absurd. The premise of the story, these burial spots, the characters like Nozdrov, which are with Donbass, where Gogol and where is Donbass? Why? Indeed, that's a legitimate question. Why Donbass? Why Nozdrov? And these crazy covers, but together they click. And they produce very authentic and realistic portrayal of social reality. Each of them absolutely fantastic individually. In the second part, Konstantinopol'skii switches to straightforward declarations. I mean, it's crime and punishment. It's authentic music. It's the reality as it should be. And this is, of course, how the first volume and the second volume of Dead Souls of Gogol, and we read much of the second volume, we understand how it's written, what Gogol wanted to do. And to convey this, so Konstantinopol'skii actually produced the first volume, and the second that we genuinely want to burn. And this is a huge, this is a feat of no small proportion. This is artistic achievement. I really want to burn this part. And I understand, I never understood this story about Gogol burning the second volume. Why? And so I lived through this experience. I believe it, I understand it now. So what Konstantinopol'skii uses to translate this, Gogol's metaphysical statement, is he's using this Hinduist, Buddhist idiom, which is more familiar to Americans in the audience, less than to Russian scholars, particularly the concept of Maya, literally illusion, as scholars describe it, an illusion where things appear to be present but are not what they seem, or what is spiritually unreal, or that conceals the true character of spiritual reality. So the first part of the film is all about dreams, alcohol and drug trips. Social critique stems not from political stance, but from philosophical one. And I quote a modern student of Buddhism, Maya is a display of what is not a real quality and is associated with both passion, lust, raga, and bewilderment, erring, moha, by being overly attached to wealth and honor. Its function is to provide a basic for perverse lifestyle. So all this Krishna, Vishnu, instead of these Greek sons of Manilovs, this is the quote that Konstantinopol'skii gives us for this idiom. This is what Gogol attempted to achieve using a less handy, I would argue, idiom of Christian mysticism, of showing the what is just an illusionary world, but and then trying in second volume to produce real spiritual, or show us what normative spiritual reality is. And the second volume is about approaching the true inner nature of reality, and hence the breaking point in the film comes when government is the very last scene of the second episode, when the governor explicitly admitted the criminal character of the social elite and the entire social order. And I can briefly show you how he does it. But so what follows is the attempt to model reality on the normative inner truth. And this attempt is doomed. It failed Gogol, and it failed aesthetically from the very beginning. And it's another story why. Let me show the moment where, and we didn't realize when we watched it, the first two episodes, when everything broke into, no, sorry,
Are you sharing with us?
Get me back. No, it's just 5 seconds that I want to show you.
Can you share the screen?
How? Sorry. Yes, I want to camera, and this is what it.
Share screen and select the frame.
Can you hear him?
No.
Jesus. Why? Okay, I'm getting back. So he said, sorry, guys. Yeah.
Say it yourself.
Ну что, господа, воры, stop share, okay. I'm sorry. Воры, коррупционеры, whatever. He stops suddenly, governor stops speaking his own voice and began translating the authoritative normative discourse from And at this point, this is the breaking point for the film. Everything that goes after that is that it starts the second volume. The reality is it should be from upper moral value point of view. So all these FSB gangsters that working for the states, against the states, using the state, it's not important exactly because this is Maya. I mean, it depicted realistically there in the first part, but as social historian, I can live with it. I like it. I mean, I recognize it as a reality. And government tells the truth. Nobody, they're tricksters. And when somebody tells the truth, it blows up this world of the first two episodes. And the effect of social realism and aesthetical and political very precise message is produced by Gogol and Konstantinopol'skii by combining these absurd elements. And when he tries to speak in these straightforward, direct statements, everything collapses because the very design of the textual aesthetic language, the design was based on this trickster narrative.
Hey, thank you, Ilya. That's a fascinating theory. You should have thrown it into the discussion table earlier. Now we don't have time to react to this, but thank you anyway. So we have a few other questions which unfortunately we cannot answer, but there is one question which I would like all of you answer briefly, but nevertheless, it also a question from Elena Baraban. And Lena, thank you for other questions. Sorry that we couldn't address all of them. Given the criticism of the ending, what do you think would have been a better ending for the film? How would a 2020 Chichikov end up? Any fantastic suggestion? One or two sentences, no more. Any ideas?
It's perfect. It's adaptation. Gogol supposedly burned the second volume. You should burn the second volume. That's the master plan. I mean, the design of Gogol, and this is what should be in the film.
But you said that it's already happening. You wanted to burn it yourself.
Yeah. So it's complete. I mean, it's right.
So it's a perfect ending. You don't want another.
Absolutely, no. I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't watch it, but.
Mila, Anne.
Don't finish, let it hang in the air. So Chichikov just disappears.
Or drives off and leaves you wanting more and keeps you waiting to see whether or not there'll be a sequel.
Mm-hmm. Dasha, what would you suggest?
Oh, I think that the ending is about cinema. So to me, it's a perfect ending. That's a statement. That's an artistic statement to me at the end. So that question is not for me.
It's a difficult question. As we know, Gogol didn't know how to end it up either. So we cannot avoid.
But I don't think that there's anything in the narrative or in the aesthetics of this adaptation that precludes any conclusion at all. It can go literally in any way, I think. And obviously on open-endedness supports that in my view.
All right. So it's 8:59 and we want to thank you for your most interesting interpretations, thoughts, ideas. I hope that our audience, those of them who watch this film, learn something new maybe. Those who haven't would like to find it, and we have the link to the site where this film is available. It's this link is on the announcement at the Harriman Institute site, and I also pasted it into the chat, so those of you who can see it, please, you may use it, of course. Dasha, any famous last words?
Join us on March 23rd for the discussion of Dear Comrades.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.